When did a simple family wagon become a symbol of luxury, style, and status? In the 1960s, the United States took station wagons to another level. They were no longer just enormous cars for carrying children, luggage, and groceries. Today, we will look at 10 of the most elegant American wagons of the 1960s, from models that dominated the suburbs to true rarities that have almost disappeared from the roads. And before we begin, leave your like and subscribe if you also believe that a great wagon can have just as much presence as any luxury coupe. 1969, Mercury Marquis Colony Park. If Lincoln had decided to build a station wagon in 1969, it probably would have ended up looking something like this. In fact, Mercury practically built the Colony Park around that idea. For 1969, the enormous wagon became part of the Marquis family and received a front end with hidden headlights, an imposing grille, and a presence deliberately close to the most prestigious automobiles from Ford Motor Company. Mercury's own advertising even presented it as the answer to imagining a Lincoln Continental turned into a wagon. And all it took was one look to understand why. Its long side panels covered in simulated wood were surrounded by bright moldings, while the chrome around the windows and wheel arches contrasted with a gigantic body. It did not try to hide its dimensions. It did exactly the opposite. It turned size into elegance. But one of its most fascinating details was at the rear. Its dual-action tailgate could open downward like a traditional tailgate, or sideways like a door. And for 1969, Mercury improved the system so that it could even be opened like a door with the rear glass raised. It was a small demonstration of engineering hidden inside a family automobile. Under the hood, a 390 cubic inch V8 came standard, while anyone who wanted even more could order the enormous 429 V8. But that power almost seemed secondary. The Colony Park was designed to travel across enormous highways with passengers, luggage, and a level of comfort that few people today would associate with a station wagon. And perhaps that is where its charm lies. Before large SUVs became family status symbols, the United States already had something similar, a gigantic living room on wheels, covered in wood and with headlights that disappeared behind the grille. 1960 Buick Invicta. Some automobiles seem to belong perfectly to their decade. And then there is this Buick, which seems to have been caught between two eras. In 1960, the futuristic excesses of the 1950s had not completely disappeared. That is why the Invicta estate retained an extravagant silhouette, with enormous glass surfaces, abundant chrome, and a body that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the rear. It was a family station wagon, yes, but from certain angles it had more presence than many luxury automobiles. And that was no coincidence. The Invicta sat one step above the LeSabre, combining a more distinguished image with additional equipment. Buick even offered this wagon in 2- or 3-row seating configurations, and the 1960 brochure advertised specific interiors with Balmoral and Cordovan fabrics in different color combinations. The turbine drive automatic transmission, electric clock, and higher-grade trim details were also part of the Invicta package. But beneath that enormous family body was something unexpected, the 6.6-liter 401 Wildcat V8, producing approximately 325 horsepower. Imagine it in 1960, parked in front of a suburban house, loaded for a family trip. The children could ride in the back, the suitcases occupied the remaining space, and even then, the father of the family had one of Buick's great V8s beneath his right foot. Perhaps that is what makes the Invicta estate so special. It did not try to turn a wagon into something discreet or rational. Buick took a family automobile and dressed it with the same exuberance that was defining its great passenger cars. And 6 decades later, it still looks anything but ordinary. 1966, Chevrolet Caprice. In 1966, Chevrolet did something curious. It took the automobile that normally ended up filled with suitcases, children, and groceries, and decided to dress it as though it were on its way to a private club. That year, Caprice became Chevrolet's new prestige series, and the wagon was perhaps the most extravagant demonstration of that philosophy. The brand itself spoke of elegance comparable to much more expensive automobiles, and offered its custom wagons with 2 or 3 rows of seats and enormous side panels designed to imitate the appearance of hand-polished wood. The result was spectacular. An endless roofline, abundant glass, chrome moldings, and that simulated wood running along almost the entire body. Even while parked, the Caprice looked prepared to cross several states in a single journey, and in the three-row versions, all that size could be transformed into space for a truly large family. But Chevrolet was not content simply to decorate a conventional wagon. The specific 1966 catalog presented it directly as its new design and elegance for wagons, highlighting all vinyl interiors, carpeting, and a level of finish intended to clearly separate it from the brand's more basic family models. What is fascinating is imagining what it represented at the time. You could arrive at an elegant hotel in a Caprice coupe, or appear with practically the same design language while carrying the entire family and half the luggage in the house. That was true American luxury, not having to choose between space and presence. And now, I want to know your opinion. If you had to choose just one wagon from the 1960s for a long trip across the United States, would it be this Caprice or one of the ones we have already seen? Leave it in the comments. 1968 Buick Custom Sport Wagon. Before panoramic roofs became a symbol of modern luxury automobiles, Buick had already placed one on a family station wagon, and we are not talking about a small opening in the roof. The Custom Sport had a raised section above the rear passengers, accompanied by large glass panels that allowed them to look directly at the sky. That year, Buick even replaced the previous divided design with one large single-piece front panel while retaining the longitudinal windows above the cargo area. The result made traveling in the second row feel almost like riding inside a panoramic rail car. But Buick understood that an extravagant idea needed a body to match. For 1968, an entirely redesigned body arrived, with an interpretation of the famous Sweepspear line influenced by the Riviera. It was also considerably larger than a normal Skylark family wagon. Its wheelbase reached 121 inches, enough to offer a third row, and turn some versions into genuine transportation for 7 or 8 passengers. And if someone wanted to complete the extravagance, they could even order the Buick 400 V8, available with an impressive 340 gross horsepower. Imagine traveling at night on an American highway in 1968. The adults talking in the front, the children in the back and above their heads, the city lights passing through the glass. That perfectly summarizes this Buick. 1966 Dodge Monaco. Elegance does not always need to be delicate. Sometimes it can measure more than 18 feet long, have a grille that occupies practically the entire front end, and look capable of clearing traffic through presence alone. Monaco represented the most sophisticated side of Dodge's full-size range, and applying that name to a wagon produced something very different from a simple economy family car. Its body stretched to approximately 18.1 feet in length, but the design managed to disguise some of that size with horizontal lines, abundant glass, and a surprisingly low silhouette for such an enormous automobile. Inside, Dodge tried to move it away from the traditional utilitarian image. There were materials and finishes associated with the Monaco range, along with power and comfort options that could transform the enormous cabin into a genuine lounge for traveling for hours. Even the rear tailgate glass could be operated electrically, a detail that seems trivial today, but in a mid-1960s wagon was exactly the kind of convenience that helped sell luxury. And here appears one of those deliciously American contradictions. Beneath that body designed for family vacations, a 6.3-liter 383 V8 producing 315 gross horsepower could be found as standard. It was enough power to move a gigantic machine loaded with passengers and luggage with authority, although that was never the Monaco's true charm. Its appeal was somewhere else. It was a wagon that did not apologize for being enormous. It made excess part of its elegance. And in a decade when size, comfort, and prestige could still walk together, few family cars represented that philosophy better than this Dodge. 1967 Ford Country Squire. Some cars become classics. Others eventually become part of the memory of an entire generation. The Country Squire belongs to the second group. In 1967, Ford proudly advertised itself as America's station wagon specialist, and its most distinguished model was precisely this enormous family car covered with simulated wood paneling, seen in front of a suburban house with the roof rack loaded and the entire family ready to leave on vacation. It looked like the perfect image of the American dream. But behind that traditional appearance were surprisingly ingenious solutions. Its famous magic door gate could open sideways like a door to make passenger access easier, or fold downward like a conventional tailgate for loading luggage. And versions equipped with rear-facing seats could carry up to 8 people, turning the rear section into a small lounge where the last passengers traveled facing one another. Ford even offered features such as air conditioning, a power rear window, a stereosonic 8-track sound system, and different interior configurations. For anyone who thought such a wagon still needed something more absurd, the list of mechanical options extended all the way to the enormous 428 V8. However, nothing defined the country Squire better than its image: the simulated wood, the chrome, the extremely long body, and that stately stance achieved something difficult, making an automobile created to solve family problems look desirable even when it was completely empty. And I want to know something. Do the wood panels make these wagons more elegant? Or do you prefer fully painted bodies? Let me know in the comments. 1969. Chevrolet Kingswood Estate. By the end of the 1960s, Chevrolet understood that a wagon could be practical without looking humble, and the Kingswood was probably its best demonstration. It did not try to attract attention with extravagant shapes. Its elegance was in its proportions: an extremely long body, a wide front end, abundant chrome, and large side panels with simulated wood trim. It was enormous, but visually clean, almost as if Chevrolet had stretched one of its large luxury sedans until it became a rolling home for the family. And at the top of the large wagon range was precisely the Kingswood Estate. Chevrolet even offered it one very special detail: hidden headlights with integrated washers, an option reserved exclusively for this model within the family range. But the truly American feature was at the rear. With the second and third rows folded, the cargo floor could exceed 6.9 feet in length, and the dual-function tailgate could open downward or sideways like a door. On 3-row versions, the power rear window came standard. It was the kind of automobile capable of carrying children, suitcases, bicycles, and practically half the house without losing that distinguished appearance. And if all of that still seemed too sensible, Chevrolet had a solution. The engine range could go all the way up to the 427 V8, producing 390 gross horsepower. There was the perfect contradiction: a wood-trimmed wagon designed for family vacations, with almost absurd amounts of space and power, worthy of some of Detroit's most serious performance cars. 1967 to 1968, Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser. In some wagons, the most elegant detail was in the wood, the chrome, or the interior. In the Vista Cruiser, you had to look up. For 1968, Oldsmobile introduced the second generation of its famous panoramic family wagon, now riding on a 121-inch wheelbase and featuring a completely redesigned body. But it retained the feature that made it unmistakable: the raised roof with large tinted glass panels above the rear passengers and additional windows along the sides. It was not simply a wagon with more glass. It was almost a rolling observation deck. Imagine crossing Manhattan, the mountains of Colorado, or a road surrounded by trees, while the children in the second row could watch buildings, clouds, and landscapes passing literally above their heads. There were even small interior sunshades to protect those passengers from direct sunlight. It was such a peculiar solution that more than half a century later, it remains the feature that identifies the Vista Cruiser at first glance. And all that glass did not sacrifice practicality. With the seats folded, it offered around 100.5 cubic feet of cargo space, and it could be ordered with a third row to turn it into an enormous 3-row family wagon. Under the hood, the 350 cubic inch Rocket V8 could produce around 310 horsepower, while a more powerful 400 V8 was also available. But once again, that was not the real reason to remember it. The Vista Cruiser turned something as ordinary as taking the family on a trip into a different experience. Because while other wagons showed the landscape through the windows, this one also showed it through the roof. 1964. Pontiac Bonneville Safari. If there was an elegant way to carry the entire family without giving up prestige, Pontiac had a very clear answer: Bonneville Safari. In 1964, the Bonneville sat at the very top of the Pontiac range, and its wagon version transferred that status to an enormous, low, and surprisingly refined family body. The wide front end, carefully distributed chrome, and clean lines gave it a presence much closer to that of a large luxury automobile than a simple transportation tool. And Pontiac wanted it to feel that way. Period advertising insisted that a Safari should drive, look, and feel like a Pontiac, not like a utility vehicle. Even with the rear seat folded, it could offer around 97 cubic feet of cargo space, but the interior still used deep carpeting, Moroccan materials, and abundant insulation to keep the cabin quiet and comfortable. Under the hood could be found Pontiac's large 389 cubic inch V8, with configurations producing around 300 horsepower, enough to move such an enormous body with an ease that seems almost absurd for a family automobile. But its true elegance was in how well it managed to hide its function. Seen from a distance, it could look like just another majestic Bonneville stretching across the pavement. Only when the eye reached the enormous rear compartment did it become clear that it could also carry suitcases, groceries, and everything needed for a family vacation. It was Pontiac luxury, only with enough space to carry an entire life behind it. 1960 Dodge Polara. Few wagons announced the beginning of the 1960s while still looking so proudly trapped in the 1950s. The Polara was exactly that. One final explosion of the forward-look era, with enormous rear fins, abundant chrome, a low beltline, and a vast glass area that made its gigantic body look lighter than it really was. And gigantic was the right word. It measured around 17.9 feet long, could accommodate up to 8 or 9 passengers, and rode on a 122-inch wheelbase. But its dimensions almost became secondary when that sculptural rear appeared, with the fins rising above the fenders as though Dodge had wanted to say goodbye to the previous decade with one final excess of design. The Polara also occupied the most prestigious part of the Dodge range. It was not an austere family wagon disguised with a few chrome pieces. It was conceived as a genuine luxury wagon, transferring the styling of the large Polaris to an automobile capable of carrying a large family and all their luggage. And it hid an even better surprise. It could be equipped with the D500 package, associated with the enormous 383 V8. In one of its most powerful configurations, that engine could produce around 330 gross horsepower, accompanied by the 3-speed torque-flight automatic transmission. Imagine seeing it leaving a dealership in 1960. Shiny paint, fresh chrome, enormous fins, and 3 rows waiting for passengers. Today it looks extravagantly American. Back then, it was simply a very elegant way of saying that a large family did not have to travel in something boring. And with that, we close this journey through some of the most elegant American wagons of the 1960s. Now, I want to know which of these 10 you would choose for your garage. Leave it in the comments because I want to see which one becomes the favorite of this list. And if you enjoyed this journey, do not miss our video about the most elegant American wagons of the 1950s, where real wood, chrome, and extravagant designs took this type of automobile to a completely different level. See you there.